Hello there, I'm Thomas Weibenfalk. I'm a developer from Sweden, and this course is a special version of my popular React course that I created the first version of for some years ago. So this is the fourth version, so to say, but it's not as extensive as the other courses have been. So it's more like a kind of a special version of the course for more intermediate users. I'm not going to explain everything from scratch in this one. So I assume that you know some React, and then you should be good to go. So I think it's probably time to get started. All right, so let's check out the application that we're building before we start this project. And it's a little application that will display some movies for you. I call it RMDB, React Movie Database. So it's kind of a light version of IMDb if you ever use that page. I use it constantly because I'm a very big movie fan. So yeah, probably daily. All right, so here the homepage will show the most popular movies, and you can scroll down with this infinity scroll. Earlier in the versions, I had a button to load more, but in this version, I'm going to have an infinite scroll. I'm going to use React Query that is mostly used on the client. I'm actually not going to use the server-side stuff for React Query in this course, and I'm going to tell you why when we get there. So everything you see here is client fetched. So you can search for something here, Star Wars, for example. You can see that it was instantly showing here, and that's because I searched for it before. So that's React Query in action. When you've searched for something, when you fetched something, it will keep it in the cache, so you won't have to reload it again if you don't reload the app itself or leave the session, so to say. And then we have the different movies here. So if you go here for a page for a movie, you can see that it displays some information about the movie and all the actors and stuff here, directors. This is where I choose to end this application. So you won't be able to click on the different actors. But when you're finished with this course, you should be able to implement that yourself, because that's very, very similar to how you create the route for the movies themselves. You create a route for the actors and stuff, and you fetch the data from the movie database API. This is the application that we're going to build in this course. I hope you will enjoy it. So let's continue on. In this part, I'm just briefly going to show you the movie database, because it's very important that you register here and get your API key. It's free, so you don't have to worry about paying anything or so. So if you create an account here, and then you go to your settings here, and then down here at the API, I'm not going to click here now because that's going to show my API key, and I don't want to expose that. Just click here on API, and you will see your API key that you have to paste in later in the application that I'm going to show you. So register an account here at the movie database. And I'm going to use the version 3. You can see that they have version 4 also, but actually they don't have all these resources for it. So I'm still using version 3. So if you flip version here, you can see that, yeah, there's nothing much going on here. So I think they probably are working on it right now. But version 3 is fine for us. So here we have different resources to use. For example, the movies. On the homepage, we're going to grab the popular movies, and you have a get for that one here. So they tell you everything here about the API that we're going to use. And it's at developers.themoviedb.org if you want to read more about it. I'm not going to talk more about this now because I have some endpoints ready for us to use in the application that we're also going to copy over to the project when we created our NextJS project from scratch. But very important, register at themoviedb and create an account and get your API key. It's free for private use, and we can move on. Okay, it's time to actually start coding something, or at least set up our project. And we're going to use NextJS for this one. And I'm also going to use React Query and Tailwind. That's two very popular libraries, and NextJS is a framework for React that is also very popular. And it's great because you can do both server rendering and static site generation and just regular React in the client. So it's actually pretty neat, and I started to love NextJS. So that's why I'm using it here in this course. So we're going to start by kind of bootstrapping our NextJS project. So if you go to nextjs.org/docs, you have everything you need to get started with NextJS. They tell you everything about it, and it's a pretty good documentation. But you don't have to read anything now if you don't want to do that, because I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. And for this course, we're also going to use Typescript, and I have a command here that you can run to set up your application. and that's npx create dash next dash app at latest. We want the latest version. And then you have dash dash TypeScript, and that will create our project with TypeScript already set up for us. So that's pretty neat. So you could, of course, just copy this one and type it in. But as I always say when I create my courses, it's great to type it in at least the first time or the first few times when you do this, because that will make it easier to learn it, to make it stuck so that you remember it. So I'm going to go into my terminal, something like this maybe. And then I type in npx create dash next dash app at latest dash dash TypeScript. And then I press enter and I wait for it. No, I don't wait for it. I have to do some choices here. Yeah, it asks me if it's okay to proceed because it's going to install the following packages. Create next app. Yeah, we want to proceed. So select yes, Y, enter. What is your project name? You can name it, of course, whatever you want, but I'm going to name it RMDB version 4, as this is version 4. And then it will start to install something, and it actually uses yarn here. I'm not using yarn, I'm using npm. So it doesn't matter. All right, so that's Next.js. We can check out the files that it created for us. So you can see that it created a folder here, RMDB, cd RMDB version 4. Clear the console, and I open up my code editor. And let's see what we have here. So you can see that it created some files for us here, and that's great. We have our complete project here. We can start it up, and you start up a next project by typing in npm run dev, and that will start up the next application. We're going to do that just in a second, but I want to do some more stuff here before we do that. Because if you downloaded the starter files that you have to download to fully complete this tutorial, and you're going to see that you have some files. Inside of those files, you have a folder that's called files to be copied to project. And there's a config file and helpers file. And you also have a public folder with some images in it. So these ones have to go inside of this Next.js installation that we created. Okay, so I'm going to select these files here. And as I'm in VS Code, I'm going to drag them over to my project folder. And it asks me if I want to add the folder to the workspace. I don't want to do that. I want to copy it. So I want to copy the files. And it says that there's already a folder that's named public, but it's fine to replace it. We've got everything we need in the folder that we copy here. So that's the images here, the logo. You can't see them here because they are SVGs. But trust me, they are there. And then we have the config file. You can see that I have some stuff here for the API. So I have the URL, that's the base URL for the API, and the API key. I'm going to grab that from an env variable. So I'm going to create a new file here, and it's going to be called .env.local. That's how Next.js finds this env variable. And we're going to create a new one here. Yeah, it tells me that there's an extension. Okay, well, I'm not going to install that now. And then we create a variable, API underscore key, like that, equals. And here it's very important that you go back to your account at the movie database and copy your API key that I showed you in the previous part and paste it in here. No quotes or anything, just paste in your API key here as it is. And I'm also going to do that, but I'm not going to show it to you. And everything is set up for us here. I'm going to show you how to use these endpoints and stuff like that. We also have a helpers file, and this one is to calculate the time. And there's one that's called convert money that we're going to use to actually calculate and convert the numbers from the API into real money when we want to show the budget for the movie and stuff like that. We also have to do one more thing before we're finished with this setup with Next.js, and that is to go inside of the next.config.js. And inside of this file, you can configure everything that you want to do in your Next.js installation. So this is the config file for Next.js. And as we're going to be using images from an external server, we have to specify that server inside of here to be able to fetch the images from the movie database API. So we can do that inside of the next config object here, just below this one here. We create a property called images, and that is an object. And inside of that object, we have another property that's called domains. We have an array, and inside of that array, we're going to specify image.tmdb.org. And this is the server that the movie database uses for the images. So we have to specify this one here. Otherwise, NextJS won't allow us to actually fetch the images, so it won't show up. We can try to start the application up. npm run dev. You can see that it opens up on localhost 3000. So if we go to our browser, I reload it here. You can see this is the welcome screen here. So that's fine. It looks like this now. We're going to change that, of course, and create our own application. But at least we have an application up and running, and we created our next project that we're going to use to create our application. So in the next part, we're going to set up Tailwind to be used with Next.js, and that's going to be really exciting. So stick around. In the next part, we're going to install Tailwind. And if we go to TailwindCSS.com, they actually have a section where they tell you on how to install Tailwind with Next.js. So that's what we're going to use. So go back inside of your terminal. I'm going to scroll up here. And as I said before, I'm not going to copy and paste this in. I'm going to type it in because we want to learn something here. So first, we have to create our product. We've already done that. So now we're going to install Tailwind. And we need a few libraries. We have Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, and Auto Prefixer. So npm install /d to install it as a dev dependency. Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, and Auto Prefixer, like that. So we installed 3 packages in one go here. So that's why we separate them with a space. And then we press enter. So we install the packages, and now we need to run npx Tailwind CSS init to actually initialize Tailwind. npx Tailwind CSS init-p. As it says here, it will generate the Tailwind config file and the post CSS config file for us. So it tells us here that it created those files, and that's good. So go back inside of the code editor, and you can see that we have the tailwind.config and we have the postcss.config. We need to specify the paths to our different components and pages, because in Next.js, we have our pages in the pages folder, and then we're going to have a components folder where we're going to have the small components that we're going to use for our pages. So up here, you can see that we have this content. For now, it's an empty array. So we're going to fill this up with a string, and we give the path to our pages. So ./pages/ ** or asterisk / dot curly brackets. And then we specify the files inside of here. We want our JS files, we want our TS files, we want the JSX and the TSX. So that is going to grab all those file types in the pages folder and the subfolders to the pages. And then we have a comma and create another string. And that is going to be ./components ** and the same thing here, curly brackets, JS, TS, JSX, and TSX. So this will make sure that Tailwind finds the files where we're going to use the Tailwind classes. And we're actually going to come back to this file later to do our own modifications to Tailwind, where we create, for example, the grid and the height of different stuff. We're going to set the font also inside of here. So we can actually grab the font from Google Fonts, and it's called Railway, like this. And we're going to use, oh, why isn't it showing? That's pretty strange. It isn't showing me the font here. Maybe it is because I'm in the incognito mode. I don't know why, but let's see if this works. We're going to need the regular 400, so I'm going to add that one, and we're going to need the bold one, 700. And here you can see that we have the link here, so we grab this here, copy it, and inside of the pages folder, create a new file that's called _document.tsx and paste it in there. For now, it's not going to be like this, but bear with me here. I go back, and if we check the Next.js documentation, so they have a section about font optimization, and it's built in Next.js since version 10.2. And we can just grab this one here and copy it if we want to do that. But yet again, I'm actually going to type it in. But I wanted to show that it's from here that I got this code. And they actually use a class here. I don't use that anymore. I just use functional components. So I'm going to create a functional component for this one instead. So go back to the code and just push those down and import curly brackets. We have HTML, capital H. We have head, capital H, main, capital M, and next script, capital N and capital S. And we import it from next/document. So these are the components that we're going to use. And then I create a functional component, const document equal. I have an arrow function in this case. You can have a regular function if you want to have that. And I think we can actually make an implicit return here instead, as it's an arrow function. We're just returning JSX. So first we have our HTML. And these are not regular HTML tags or head tags because these are imported from the next document. So you need to use these ones here. They are special for Next.js. Then we have our head, and it's inside of the head that we're going to do this import. This one here, we actually don't need this one. And not this one because Next.js are going to optimize it itself. So we just need this last one here. Move that one inside of the head, do some auto formatting and see what happens. Yeah. We remove this one here and we self-close it instead. Yeah, and the link disappeared. So link. And now it tells me something else. And what is that? Yeah, it's not outside of head. It's actually inside of the head, but it's telling me that it's outside. Maybe it is because I haven't created my body. Yeah, probably. And for this one, we're also going to have a class name. And now we're going to use some Tailwind. We haven't created that yet, but that's what we're going to go back to our Tailwind config file and create a config for the font railway. And make sure that you spell it RALEWAY, not railway as in some kind of train stuff or anything. And inside of the body, we need to return the main component like that, and also the next script. And it still complains. I'm still inside of the head. That's strange. First, I'm going to export default document. Yeah, it was the export that created this one here. So now it should work. So what I've done here is that I imported these components from next document. And we modify this document a little bit by importing our font, our Google font. And then I add this class name, font-railway. This one, we're going to create this one ourselves just in a minute. So I add that class name to the body just to make sure that we add our font. Very important that it's called _document.tsx, and it should be in the pages folder. So go back to the tailwind.config. And here, just inside of our theme, this is how you can customize your theme. We create another property, font family. You can see that we have this IntelliSense, and that is because I installed this plugin. There we have it. If I search for Tailwind, you can see that I installed the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense, and that is really, really good to have. You can see that it has a lot of downloads. It will give you this IntelliSense and stuff of all the classes you can use. So that is pretty neat. So I'm going to do it again here. You can see if I start typing in font, you can see that it shows me font family here that actually exists on the Tailwind. So it gives me that auto completion, and that's really great. Colon, it's an object. And then we add in railway, and yet again check the spelling. And it's going to be the railway font, capital R here inside of the array. And it's going to be a sans-serif. So we fall back to that one. Great. So that's our font setup. And what did they tell us more in Tailwind here? Yeah. We move down here in the checklist. So the globals.css, we're going to add in those directives for Tailwind. Go back again to the code. And we have a global styles inside of styles. We're not going to use this module style here. So delete that one. And globals. Just mark everything here and delete it. And then we add the Tailwind directives. Tailwind base. And Tailwind components. And then we have the last one, Tailwind utilities. Like that. In some cases also, it can give you some warning here, just a yellow warning telling you that this doesn't exist or something. I don't remember it now because I don't have it. But that is fine, actually, if you have that warning. It will work anyways, probably. But for now, I don't have it here, so that's great. It usually goes away if you install that plugin that I told you about, the Tailwind plugin. I highly recommend you to use that one. It will make your job so much easier. And this is everything for now in this config for Tailwind. We're going to go back to this one and do some smaller stuff later. And we try it out, npm run dev. And now you can see that it tells me that some stuff didn't work here. So we can actually modify that one also. Because in the pages, in the index file, we have a lot of stuff here that we're not going to use. So for now, we remove it. We can create a main div like that. And just call it rmdb or something like that. And we remove all these imports here like that. Just break it, clear. And I'm going to type in npm run dev again to see that it works. No utility classes were detected in your source files. Okay, there's some error actually. Let's go back and see what it is. It actually works, but it told me that there was something wrong here. I don't know what that is, to be honest. Yeah, I probably did something wrong with the content. So let's check that out. Yeah, and I know what it is. I actually put those spaces in here. They shouldn't be there in these strings. Just remove them. And I'm going to try to start it up again. npm run dev. And now it works. And hopefully our application works. And you can see that it's actually the correct font here also. So that's great. So we successfully installed Tailwind. And we have one more library to install before we can start building some stuff. And that is React Query. And we're going to do that in the next part. We're going to install React Query, and it's actually not called React Query anymore. It's called tanstack-query. The name of the guy that's created it is Tanner Lindsley. So tanstack-query instead of React Query. Going to take some time for me to get used with that. But all right, we're going to do it. So I break this one. I clear my console. And you can see here at tanstack.com/query. We're at version 4 now. It has actually just released. And we type in npm I at tanstack/react-query. Okay, go back to our code. We need to do some stuff here to get it up and running. You can see in your code that you have an app.tsx file. And in this file, you can wrap your complete application with stuff. For example, if you want a global context or something, you can do that inside of the app. In our case, we need to have a provider for React Query or tanstack-query that is called now. So up here, we're going to import some stuff. Import query client and query client provider from, I guess, do you type in React Query? No, you don't even, no. Okay, tanstack, from tanstack. I'm so used to importing it from React Query, but that's fine. And here, we're going to create parentheses. This is a regular function here, not an arrow function that I created before. We have our query client provider, and we move our component up inside of that one. And now you can see that it wants something here. It tells us that it's need a client. We haven't created that one. So here, I create a query client, new query client, like that. And we provide the client down like so. And this will make sure that we can use React Query or tanstack-query in our application. And there's ways to do this on the server, SSR. But I'm not going to do that in this little application, and I'm going to tell you why in a future video. So this one is how you set it up the regular way on the client. You create your query client, and then you wrap your application. Otherwise, you're going to use a hydrate component and stuff like that you also can import from tanstack-query. I'm not going to do that, and it's going to be more clear in a few videos when I explain that. All right, let's see if we can start this up. npm run dev, and we see if it works. And everything seems to be working fine, so that's good. That's how you set up React query on the client. In the next section, we're actually going to start coding something for real. So we're going to start with a header component in the next section. In this part, we're going to build our first component, and that's going to be the header component. That's going to be used both on this individual movie page and also on the home page, with a little difference that we have the search here on the home page, and we don't have the search here. So we have to adapt that somehow. So let's get back inside of the code. And inside our project, we're going to create a new folder that's called components. And inside that one, we create a new folder that's called header, capital H. And inside the header, we create a new file that's called header.tsx. And it's very opinionated on how you structure your project. I like to have a components folder and also a folder for each component. In this case, you don't need to have a folder because we're only going to have one file. But it's good to have a folder if you want to add in tests and stuff, or if you have your styles in a separate file. For example, I use style components a lot, and then I have them in a separate file. So you can kind of collect everything for that specific component inside of that folder. So I like to have a folder that's named exactly as the component, and then I have the different files for that component inside of that one. So that's why I choose this way of structuring the components and the project. So we're going to import some things for this component. First, we're going to import link from next/link. And this one is used in Next.js. Instead of creating links the usual way with an A tag, you use the specific link component in Next. And that is because Next want to optimize stuff. So always use the built-in link component in Next.js when you link to pages in your application. And we're also going to import image from next/image. And this is almost the same explanation for this one. Always use the image instead of the regular img tag, because this will optimize the images in Next.js. It can be a little tricky to use actually, because it behaves a little bit strange when you, for example, have responsive images and stuff. But always use the built-in image, because that will optimize your images, and it can have a huge impact on your site and the size of your images. Then we're going to have some components. I'm actually not going to create this one now. It's the search input that we're going to create later, but I always like to mark it like this. And here I put my components. If you have a lot of imports, it's easy to see them here in the imports. Okay, so that's for later when we're going to add in the search input component. Then we're going to create our component, const header equal, and I create it as an arrow function. That means that I can make an implicit return, as we're only going to return JSX in this one. So we're going to have a div. This one is going to have a class name. So now we're going to use some Tailwind classes here. First, I want to set the position to sticky. We want the header to stay on top when we scroll. Then I set it as a flex. We want to position it at the top. So we set top -0. And here you can see the IntelliSense and auto completion and all. It gives you everything here that you can use in Tailwind. And that's what the extension made that I installed earlier. So that's super great. We want the Z level to be at 40 at least, because we want this header to be on top of everything. We set the width to full. We set the height to 24, and these ones are built in and they are kind of default in Tailwind. So 24 means, you can see here, height 6 rem, 96 pixels, and so they are predefined. And we're also going to define a few of our own later. We set the background to sync, that's also built in, and I'm going to use the 900. like that. All right, so that's it for the wrapping div. That's the div that's going to go all the way, if we look here, all the way from the left to the right. Then we have kind of an invisible div here that's in the center of that one. So that's the one that I'm going to create now. Div, class name. And this one is going to be a flex. I'm going to justify the content to between. I set the width to full. I set the height to full. And I also want to set a max width because it's going to be, as I showed here, it's going to be this one in the middle here. So it's only going to be kind of, if you see it here, this one, this part here, probably. That's going to be the middle div. So I don't want it to be wider, and I also want to center it. So I set the max dash W, that's the max width, to 7XL. And that's also in Tailwind, you have different sizes. So for example, I'm on a Mac here now. I can click Control and space, and it will show me all the stuff that I can do here. You have extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large. And then you have times extra large here also, so to say. So I'm going to use the biggest one here, 7XL. And I'm going to set the padding on X to 4. And that's going to be our inner div. Then we want our logo. And we want that one to be linked to the home page. So I use the built-in link component. And it takes an href prop. And I set it to just a / to link it to the home page. Then we're actually going to have two logos here. And that's because I want this logo to change. If you see here, when I change the viewport width, then it removes the RMDB from the logo to make place for the search field on smaller devices. So that's why I'm going to swap out the logo. So here I show that big logo, and then I kind of not show it and show the small logo instead. So I have two logos for that. All right, so first I'm going to create a wrapper div for these two logo images. So I create a div with a class name of, I'm going to set this one to flex also. And I'm going to center the items with items-center. And I want the cursor to be the pointer. And then I'm going to wrap the image component in another div because I want to make it visible and invisible. So div class name. So first we set it to invisible, meaning that it is invisible by default, but you can set different breakpoints for responsive design in Tailwind. So when we're at the medium and colon, we're going to make it visible. So meaning when the min width is, I don't remember exactly the pixels now, but when it is medium, we're going to show that logo. And otherwise it's going to be invisible. Then we're going to do the opposite of the small logo, something like that. And then we have the image component inside of here. We're going to set the width to 150. The source is going to be from the public folder. And we can look inside of that one. We have the one that's called RMDB logo SVG, RMDB-logo.svg. And we have an alt RMDB-logo. And we self-close this tag. All right. That's the large logo that's going to be shown on big screens. Then we have another div with a class name of, yet again, we set the breakpoint for medium, MD colon, and we set it to invisible. And we set the padding top to 2 for this one. And then we have the image component. We set the width to 42. And these are just numbers that I tried out that fits well. We have the source / RMDB-logo-small.svg. And we have an alt RMDB-logo small. And we self-close it. And we also need to export this component. So export default header like that. Save the file. And this is it for now. We're going to come back to this one later, as I said. And now we're going to go inside of the pages folder to the index. That's our home page. Next.js works like that. When you want the route, you create it inside a pages folder. So the index.tsx is the home page, the home route. If you want another route, let's say that you want a route that's called Weben, then you create a file that's called Weben.tsx, and it will create that route. If I want it to be, for example, Thomas /Weben, then you create a folder that's called Thomas, and you create Weben.tsx inside of that folder. So that's how you route stuff in Next.js. So let's see here now. I'm going to mark this with components just as before. And this is just a personal preference. And we import the header. And you can see the auto completion here. It's imported from .components/header/header/header. And I know some people say, yeah, you have to type in header 2 times. And you can have an index file inside of the header folder also that exports the header component, and then you just have to type it in once, but it has some other cons that I don't like actually. And I don't want to talk very much about structuring the project because that's a very, very opinionated topic, so to say. And a lot of people have strong arguments on stuff like that. So do as you want. I'm doing it like this. Okay, so we have our main div here. We're going to add a class name for this one. This one is going to be scrollable. We want it to be relative also, so we can set absolute positioned elements inside of it. The height is going to be the screen height. And this is how you do it in Tailwind. H-screen will set the height of the screen. We have an overflow -y-scroll on this one. And this is because I want the scroll bar to be visible all the time. I'm not particularly sure that it's always good to have that, but otherwise, when the scroll bar appears, the kind of content will shift in the X position, and that's no good, I think. So in this case, in this course, I'm going to set it to be visible all the time, and we won't have that issue. We can also add in parentheses here, as we're going to add in more components now. And we have our header. So this is how it should look now. And I'm going to save this to see if it works. I have some error here. Okay, yeah, we have to set the width and height on the images. So go back to the header. So let's say height 50 maybe. And this one we can have the same height. Go back. And now you can see that it works. Hopefully it will shift, yeah. But it's not positioned right. Okay. So I messed something up here. Let's go back. So I can set a background on this one just to make sure. The classic red background to see that div. And now you can see this one here. It should be centered. Yeah, I haven't added that one in, of course. I can see that now. We're going to set the margin to auto, and that will center it. So add that one in here on this div, m-auto, and that will center it. But that logo will be in the wrong place. And I think we can just set it to maybe make it an absolute position like that. Let's see. Yeah, you can see. It's a little bit bigger maybe, but that's fine, I think. So we can remove the red background. So it seems to be working. We have our header with the logo, and that's great. Then later we're going to add in the search functionality and the search input field for this homepage. We're going to do that later. Okay, we're going to scaffold out some components for the homepage in this video. But first, a little correction here. I don't know if you got this on your own, but in the _app.tsx file, I got a little semicolon that shouldn't be there on line 10, just after the component. Remove that one if it's there. And I'm just going to check, yeah, because I had some weird scrolling behavior here where it scrolled the body also. We shouldn't have that. And also, if you wondered here on the header why this logo here was in the middle and I added in absolute, If I remove this one here, you can see that it moves to the middle. And that is because this original logo here is actually there. It's just invisible. So it is positioned just to the right of it. So that's why I added in absolute, and that will kind of place it over the other logo that isn't visible. So that's why it works by doing it like so. All right. And now we're going to scaffold out some components that we need for the home page. We have the header. We're going to need a hero component. So inside the components folder, create a new folder that's called hero and create a new file that's called hero.tsx. And for now, we're going to create a const hero equal an empty arrow function. And it's going to have a div that says hero. Export default hero. In this case, we're going to copy it and save this component, create another folder inside of components that's called grid. Always capital first letters on React components. Create a file inside of this grid.tsx and paste in the code from the hero and change the hero to grid. Save it. Create another folder inside of components, and we're going to have a component that's called card. Create a new file that's called card.tsx. Paste in the hero code again and change hero to card. Like that. And we're also going to have a spinner. So create a new folder called spinner. And a new file inside of that one called spinner.tsx. Paste in the code, change hero to spinner. Like so, save it. Go back to the index.tsx and we can import these components here. So this is just some preparation for future stuff that we're going to do. Import hero. And that's nice that with that autocomplete again. So we don't have to type everything in. Import grid. Import card. And import spinner. And then we can just place them here for now. So we have our hero. We have our grid. We have our card. And we have our spinner. Save it, go back to see that it works. And we have everything here. So this is just some preparation because we're going to create these components soon. We can actually remove this RMDB text also. We don't need that one now. And also, as we're in TypeScript, you can see that this was already imported for us because this page was created when we set up NextJS. But when you create a page and you use TypeScript, you have a built-in type for the page from Next. So you set that type to the page, and it will be typed as a NextJS page by importing this one here. All right, this is it for this part. So we've scaffolded out some stuff here for our application, and it's time to actually make some functionalities so that we can fetch some data because, yeah, it's no application, it's no movie application if we don't have any movies and data in it. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's move inside of the code, and I'm going to place this in a new folder that I call API, and this is going to be in the root. So I create a new folder, API, and this is where I collect everything for the API and create a new file inside of that folder that's called fetch functions, camel casing. And this is really important. I realized that I could maybe call it something else. But if you create an API folder inside of the pages folder, that will create something that's called NextJS API routes. We're going to use that also, but not now when we create this one. So these are completely different things. The API folder that I created now has nothing to do with NextJS at all. I just call it API because I think it's nice to know that I have everything collected in that folder that's for the API. And we're going to create what I call a basic fetch function that we're going to use both client side and server side to fetch data. Because on the home page, we're going to use the client to fetch the data. It's going to be client side. And on the individual movie page, we're going to fetch it on the server by creating static generated pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export const basic fetch, and I export this function so that we can use it anywhere we want by importing it. I create an arrow function now. You can do it however you want. I like to create arrow functions, and it's going to be async. And I create a TypeScript generic for this one. We have the endpoint that we're going to receive as a string here. And we're going to return a promise with the return type. This is getting really long now. Yeah, this shouldn't be a capital R like that. This can be a little bit troublesome to create a generic with an arrow function, depending on how your setup is. I think this works as I did it here now because I'm in a TS file. Otherwise, I think you have to add a comma like this, but I don't need to do that now. And if this is troublesome, just use a regular function instead. You don't need to use an arrow function at all. So in this basic fetch function, we can specify the return type of the data that we receive in this async function. So that's why I created a TypeScript generic, and it will return the promise with the return type that we specify. So I'm going to create a const with the response. I await, and I'm going to fetch the endpoint. And that's the argument that we send in to this function. So we can give it an endpoint and it will fetch it for us, hopefully. If the response.OK, if not that one is okay, then we're going to throw an error. Throw new error. Yeah. Error. Yeah. You can have whatever error message that you want. And hopefully, if everything is good, we're going to get the data by awaiting the response.json. We convert it to JSON and we await that one. And then we return the data. And I know you can make this in lesser rows. I know there's a lot of people that are going to say that, oh, this is very, very verbose or something. But yeah, it is verbose because this is a course I teach stuff. So that's why I'm a little bit over verbose sometimes. And I think it's also great to have it much more readable like this when it's not that much code, really. So if you feel the urge to kind of say something about that, please don't do. Oh, a little bit of coffee here also. That's great. Okay, so that's our basic fetch function. That's what we're going to use to fetch the data. So this is really, really generic. We can use it for whatever data we want to fetch. So that's good. We have a function that can fetch data for us. In the next part, we're going to create an API route in Next.js, and I'm going to explain why then. We're going to be at the server on this one. So inside the pages folder, we have another folder that's called API, and we have some dummy stuff here that Next.js created for us. We have a file that's called hello.ts. And in the APIs folder, you can actually be on the server and create server code. So you don't have to have a specific installation and create your server outside of Next.js. So that's super great. We can create server stuff here inside of Next.js in what's called a Next.js API route. And it works almost the same as the pages. You create a file inside of here. And in our case, it's going to be called movies because we're going to use this route to fetch the movies. So movies.ts, we can actually remove this hello.ts. We don't need it. So the API route for this one is going to be something like /API/movies. And that's going to be the API route for this one. And I want to create an API route here because I don't necessarily want to expose the API key for the movie database API. So we can kind of create a proxy for this. So we fetch the data inside of this API route. And that means that we use that API key here. We don't need to use it in the client. We can just hit this API route. And that is the route that's going to use the API key instead. And that means that we don't expose the API key to the client. And that's really good to not do that. If we go to the API folder, we're going to create some types for this one. So create a new file called types.ts, and we're going to export type movies. You could also create an interface if you want to use that instead. And the type that I'm going to create here, it's taken directly from the movie database API. So I create these types from that. So we're going to have the page. It's going to be a number. The results is going to be a movie array. And we're going to create the movie type also in a second. We have a property that's called total pages that equals number. And total underscore results. That's going to equal a number like that. And now we need to create our movie type. So export type movie. And this one is going to have a backdrop underscore path. That is going to be a string. An ID, that's a number. It's going to have an original title. That's going to be a string. The overview, it's going to be a string. Popularity, it's going to be a number. We have the poster underscore path, that's going to be a string. We have the title, that's going to be a string. We have the vote underscore average, that's going to be a number. We have the vote underscore count, that's going to be a number. We have the budget, that's going to be a number. We have the runtime, it's going to be a number. We have the revenue, it's going to be a number. And the last one is going to be the release underscore date, and it's going to be a string. So these are the different properties that we're going to use. So I only type the properties that I'm going to use. All right. And as I export these types, it means that I can import it here in the API route. But first, we're going to import some types from next API request and next API response, like that. And then we have our API URLs. And these ones are going to be from the config file that we copied over to this folder before. So I have some stuff here that we can use. You see that I export them as an object here. So we're going to need the search base URL and the popular base URL. If you want to know more about them, you can check this file out. So go back to the movies.ts and we import search base URL and popular base URL from our config. Then we're going to import our basic fetch. Import basic fetch. That's the one that we created in the last part. And then we have our newly created type. Import. I like to be explicit. So import type movies from the types. Then we know that it's a type that we import. We can actually move these ones down here to the types also. And now we can create our API route in Next.js. So that's great. And you do it by export default a function, an async function. And we call it handler. It will receive the request. And it's going to be of the type next API request. That's the one that we imported. And it's also going to retrieve the response. And it's going to be of the type next API response that we imported. But we can be a little bit more specific here, as this is a generic. So we can specify it as movies. That's the type that we created. And we have curly brackets. And this API route is going to have a search param. The user is going to type in the movie that it wants to search for. So we're going to grab that search param from the request. And we destructure out the page and the search from the request.query. And we can mark it as grab search params. So we both need the page as a search param, and we also need the search. The search is going to be the string that the user typed in to search for. So we have two search params, and they can be grabbed from the request.query. Then we have our endpoint. And this endpoint is going to be different if we search for a movie or if we don't search for a movie. If we don't search for a movie, it's going to grab the most popular movies. Otherwise, we search in the movie database. So we have two different URLs, and that is why we import the search base URL and the popular base URL here. So if we have a search, we're going to create the string for the endpoint. I have backticks, $, and we use our search base URL. Then we add in our search. That's the search param. And we have an ampersand page, and we grab the page from the search params like that. So that's the endpoint if we're in the search. Otherwise, colon. So this is a turner operator I use here to choose the correct endpoint. Otherwise, we're going to grab the popular movies. And we have the popular base URL, but we also need to add in the page. So we have the ampersand page, and we grab our page like that. A little bit long here, but hopefully it's pretty easy to read. So two different endpoints. All right, that's our endpoint that we're going to send into our basic fetch function. So we grab the data, we await our basic fetch, and we give it the endpoint. But if you remember, we also created this one as a generic, so we can specify the return type like this, and we give it the movies. And if everything goes well, we have the response.status 200, and as JSON, we return the data like that. And that will hopefully have created an API route for us to use. And we will see in the next part if this actually works or if I did some mistake here and I have to correct it, but hopefully not. So let's continue on in the next part. All right, in this part, we're actually going to see some data. We're going to grab some data from the movie database API with React query. And that's pretty awesome, actually. It's always an eye-opener when you see the data. So the first thing that we're going to do is to go to our fetch functions in the API folder. And we're going to create a small function for React query to use because React query needs a fetch function that we're going to send into the hook that we're going to use from React query. But all of that in a second. Let's create the fetch function first. So we export the const fetch movies equal. It's going to be async. So we have the search. That's the search that the user is going to type in. And it's going to be an empty string by default. And page, it's going to be 1 by default. And this one is going to return a promise. It's a generic. And it's going to be of the types movies. So I imported the type automatically up here now. Import movies from .types. And this is an arrow function. Something like that. And we return await. We use our basic fetch. We send in movies because that is a generic. We give it the endpoint backticks /API/movies. We have a question mark. We have the search param, so to say, $, and we give it the search. We also have an ampersand and the page, $, curly brackets, and the page. So this is how you access the API route that we created in Next.js. It's going to be on the host that you're on and /API/movies. And I know also that some people have had trouble with this relative route here. If you run into trouble here, when you've deployed your site and have the absolute URL, you can paste it in here or do some stuff to get the absolute URL instead. But hopefully this will work for you. So this is the fetch function for React query. And then inside of the API folder, we're going to create a new file and call it fetchhooks.ts. So we're going to create a hook to fetch our movies. So first we import use infinity query from tanstack/React query. And we're going to use the infinity query because we're going to load more pages when we scroll. It could also be that you click a button and load more pages, but that's why we use the infinity query. We have our fetch function, import fetch movies, and that's the one that we just created. And then we need some types. So import movies from the types. And then I export const use fetch movies. I think it's great to create your own hook instead of using the use infinity query directly in your component, in your page in this case. It's great to separate them out in their own hooks like this. But that's probably just a preference also, so you can do however you want. But this is the way I like to do it. This one is going to take in the search, and it's going to be a string. We have an arrow function. And we're going to return the use infinity query, use infinite query. And in React query, you first specify a key, and the key has to be unique. In our case, it's going to be movies as a string, and then we also give it the search. So this key is an array. So every time we search for something, it's going to be specified with the movies, and then it's going to be different because we have the different search here. So it's going to have a unique key, but movies is always going to be the same on the different fetches that React query does. Then we have a comma, and we're going to have our fetch function. In our case, we're going to create an inline arrow function. We're going to destructure out the page param and set it to 1 for the initial value. And then we call the fetch movies with the search and the page param like that. And be very careful here with the different parentheses. Here we're going to have a comma, and we're going to have an object. This is the options object for React query. So first you have the key, and then you have your fetch function. And I create an inline fetch function here because I want access to the page param that React query provides us. I want to send that one into our fetch movies function. So that's why I do it like this. And then we have a comma, and this is the object here where we can set some different options for React query. For example, we want to get the next page param. You can see the autocomplete here also. It is fully typed React query, so we get the autocompletion. React query needs to know what the next page param is. So it has this property get next page param, and it's going to take in a function with the last page, and it's going to be of the type movies because it's the movies that we're fetching. And now we're going to get the next page param. So we can get that by if last page dot page is less than last page dot total pages. And these types are from the types that we created earlier. That's our total pages. So we check here if the page isn't the total pages, then we know that we're not on the last page. And then we can return from our last page dot page +1. Otherwise, we return undefined. Then we're at the end. All right. And then there's also an option that I want to set that I usually do, and that is refetch on window focus. I don't want it to refetch the data every time I lose focus from the window. So I set that one to false. You have a lot of other different options here. So you can see there's a lot of stuff here you can do. And always when you're in TypeScript like this, if you're on a Mac, click Control and space, and you can see what you can do here. So that's great with TypeScript. All right, this is our fetch hook. And now we're going to use this one inside of the index. And we're hopefully going to grab some data. I just want to make some little statement here, and that is why I don't fetch the data server side. And that is because React query isn't actually that great in Next.js for fetching server-side data, because React Query has a super great cache that we want to utilize. And if we, for example, grab the data server-side here, every time when you leave the page and go back to the page, it's going to grab the data from the server, meaning that we need to keep track on the server also which page we're on, what data we already fetched. Otherwise, it will get wiped out because it will fetch the initial data that we specify in the get server-side props in Next.js. So that's why I don't do it here, because it will essentially wipe out the cache from React Query. And that's no good, because caching in React Query is one of the greatest things, I think. So that's why I'm not fetching it server-side here. And we're also going to have an infinite scroll. So that's why we're going to be on different pages. So if you're on page 10, you go to a movie and then you go back to the home page. It will wipe everything out and go to page 1. So we have to make some more sophisticated implementation of pagination and stuff like that in our infinity scroll to get this to work. And this can be really tricky, to be honest. And I didn't want to include that one in this course because it's complicated. So on the home page, I will use React Query just on the client. But that's also great because it has the cache and we can use the cache, meaning that if we're on page 10, we've loaded 10 pages. We go to a movie, leave the home page, and we go back, and then we will have the cache, so we don't need to fetch the data again. All the movies up to page 10 will be fetched. So that's super great with React Query. I marked this with fetch hook and import use fetch movies. And that's the one, of course, that we just created. We're also going to have a state for the search query. So const query set query equal. From React, we use state, and it's going to be an empty string initially. And we also need to import React now. You can also destructure out this one here when you import useState, of course, if you want to do that, and just import useState from React. But I like to have it like this because then I clearly see what's coming from React. So this is also a preference that I have. So let the magic happen, so to say. We're going to fetch some data now, hopefully. Const, we're going to destructure out the data, the fetch next page, and is loading, is fetching, and maybe error also. From use fetch movies, and we're going to give it the query. And these ones are all coming from React Query. We just pass them along here, so to say, in our fetch hook. So all these properties here are coming from React Query. And we can console log the data to see if it works. Go back to our site, reload it, and we can see if we have some data here. We have the page param. It's undefined because we're on page 1. And here we have the data, so it's working. This is the data from the movie database API that we're going to use to display all these nice cards with the movies and stuff like that. So it's working pretty well. That's awesome. In the next part, we're going to implement the search input so the user can type in something to search for. All right, we have scaffolded some things out and we have created our header almost. We're going to have the search field in the header also, as we have here, so that we can search for stuff or movies. Actually, not stuff. We're going to search for movies. So we're going to create this search field now, and we have some things to consider here, because you can see if we type something here, we don't instantly grab stuff from the API. So we're going to have some kind of debouncing here so that we don't hit the API on every keystroke. We're going to wait a little bit before we hit the API. I think we're going to wait for about 0.3 seconds or something, I think it is, that I've put in as a value. So we're going to have a state for the search field itself when we type things in like this. So it's a controlled search field. And then we're going to have a function that triggers with a little delay. So we're going to debounce that one. And when we change that state, we're going to grab stuff from the API. And if we go back to the code, you can see here in the index.tsx file that we already have this query and set query. So this set query is the function that we're going to send in to the search field component. But let's do that when we get there. First, we're going to create a new folder for the component. So inside the components folder, create a new folder called SearchInput, like that. And then we create a new file, SearchInput.tsx. And we're going to import React from React. And we're also going to have a little image. I don't have it here in this version, but I'm going to place the little TMDB logo here in the search field also to display that we actually are using the TMDB API. They wanted to highlight that somewhere, and I think it's cool to have it in the search field. You're going to see that in a second. So we're going to import image from next/image. And then we're going to have some props for this one. So type props equal. And in this case, I'm going to send in the set query, the state setter that we created in the index.tsx. You could, of course, have a prop where you can send in any function that you want. But in this case, in this application, this search input is only used in the header, and it's only going to ever receive this set query. So it's very, very specific for this component. It's not really reusable for anything else in this case. Set query. And what type are we going to have on this one? Well, if we go back to the index.tsx, usually you can just hover over the stuff to see the type. So we hover over the set query, and you can see the type here, React.dispatch, and it's a generic, so it takes in the React.setState action. And that's also generic, and we specify that as a string. So copy this type here, go back to the search input, and we can specify the type like that. And that's the only prop that we're going to need for our search input. Then we create the component, search input. We just structure out the prop, set query, and we specify the type, props. And we're going to have an arrow function. And in this case, we can't make an implicit return because we're going to have some logic. So down here, we're going to return. We have a fragment because we need to return just only one JSX element. And then we have the input. For now, we're just doing it like this. And then we're going to have a div where we're going to have our image like that. And now it's going to complain because we have to fill stuff in here. But I also want to show you that I'm specifying the props like this in my React component. You could also specify it like this from the FC, and then you send in the props to the generic like this. So I think it's only a matter of preferences today. They say that if you use this way, you specify the children prop, and that's no good. Probably it won't cause any harm, I think. But I usually do it like this now. And you can see that we have the correct type here. It's going to be a JSX element. So if we, for example, would have children in this component, so we had a prop with children, and it's going to be the type React.React node. We have to specify the children's explicitly here. But if you use the already specified type with the functional component, you don't have to specify the children explicitly here. But anyways, you can do as you want. It doesn't matter, I think. We're going to need some state for our controlled input field. So const state, or we can actually call it text and set text. And from React we have the use state. We can set it to an empty string as default. And that's it for now. We're going to create something else here also. I'm going to show you that in a second. But for now, we're going to create our input field. And this is going to have quite a string with class names from Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to show you that also. But first, we can specify the type to be of text for the input field. We have a placeholder that's going to say search movie. We have a value that's going to be the value here in the state. So it's the text. And we're going to have the onChange handler. We haven't created that one, but we can call it handle input. And for now, we create this one as an empty function. This one is going to get the event from the input field. So we have the event, and that type is React.changeEvent. It's a generic also. So we specify it even more with HTML input element. That's the type that we're going to use. And from this event, we're going to grab the value, const value, e.currentTarget.value. That's how we get the value from the input field. And for now, we can just set the text to the value, like so. And we're going to put some styling on this input field now. So class name equal. First, we're going to set the height to 10. We're going to set the padding right to 14. And of course, these are values that I have tried out. And so, yeah, I have done this with trial and error, as you always do with CSS. You try your way forward, so to say. Then we're going to have a media query here. So MD colon, we're going to set the width to 96, like that. So when we are on larger screens, we set the width to 96. We want it to be rounded dash full. That's going to create it as this one here. It's rounded to the full on the sides. We're going to set the padding P-4. The text size is going to be text-MD. The background is going to be sync. So background-sync and 700 maybe. The text is going to be white. So text-white. And now it's getting really, really long here. We're going to change the focus. So focus, outline, -none. We remove the kind of default focus, and then we're going to style it ourselves. So we set the focus again, focus, We're going to have a border, and then we have focus, border dash solid. When we set it to border here, that means that it's 1 pixel. And then we set the color on the focus, border dash cyan 200. And I think that's it for this one. And this is actually one thing that I don't like with Tailwind is that we have this ugly long string with different class names, but I guess it's fine. I don't know. Yeah, I usually use style components. I'm not really a fan of these long class names here. It looks a little bit ugly, but it works. So I guess the point that it's really convenient. And that's probably great. Then we have the div, the wrapper div for the little image that we're going to have. So we have a class name on that one. We're going to set this image to an absolute position. We set it to right -4 and top -8. And the image itself, it's going to be of the width 30. Height is going to be 32. And the SRC, the source, is going to be /tmdb-logo.svg. If we look in the public folder, we have that file here. So it should actually be underscore like that. I don't know why that's an underscore. I'm actually going to change this to a dash instead. And we have an alt on this one, tmdb-logo. And this is it for now. We're going to come back to this in a second. But first, we're going to import it into the header, just below where we marked the components. So import search input from /search input/search input. Yeah, we haven't exported it yet, so I'm going to go back and do that. Export default search input. Of course, we need to export it also. It's very easy to forget that one actually. So make sure that you export the search input component, go back to the header, and now we can use it. And as you can see, we're going to use this one here inside of the header. And this search input needs this prop set query. So copy this one from the search input, go back to the header. We're going to need this one here also to pass this one along to the search input. And you could, of course, create a context or something so you don't have to pass them down. But this is only 2 levels down, so I think it's fine, and it's only one prop. So I don't think we need to complicate things with a context and stuff like that. Set query, and we have the props. You can see now that TypeScript complains because it tells us that we need to pass this set query along to this header. So we're going to do that, set query, inside of the index.tsx file. And we pass it along like that. And now it won't complain. So go back to the header. And down below here somewhere, no, actually below the link. So we want this one only to be displayed on the home page, not on the individual movie pages for this application. And we can do a little trick here. We can actually mark this one as optional with a question mark in TypeScript. And down below here, we can check if we have the set query. We're going to display this search field. And we're going to do that inside of a wrapper div with a class name of flex. We center the items with items-center. And we can also make it relative. We make it relative so that the search field's absolute positioning will be relative to this div, this wrapper div. And then we have the search input and the set query. And it's going to equal the set query like that. As this is a turner operator here I created, I also need to specify it to be null when there's no query set. So we show this header without sending in a set query. That we're going to do on the individual movie page. It means that we won't display this one. So that's great. That's exactly what we want. We only want this to be displayed on the home page. So we made it a little bit flexible here, meaning that if we have a setter that we send in as a prop, we're going to display the search input. Otherwise, we just ignore it so we don't display it. So if we check out our application now, we should have the search field here. You can see that we have it. And I actually used the wrong logo. Okay, I'm going to fix this one to be the correct logo. Why is it the wrong logo? That is the old one I somehow have managed to put here. But I'm going to change this one to the correct logo for the next part. But for now, I'm going to use this logo here. But you can see that we have this search field. Nothing happens now, but this is a control component, meaning that we are actually changing the state when we type something in because we created it as a control component with state. And now we want to actually grab something from the API when the user types something in. So with this set query, we go back to the search input. We have this set query. We're actually not calling it anywhere here now. We're going to do that inside of the handle input. And we're going to debounce this one. So we want a timer. And the way I like to do it is to create a const timer. And from React, we have something that's called useRef. And it's a generic also because it's going to be initialized as null here. But we want to specify the type, and it's going to be of the type a node.js.timeout. That's the timer that we're going to use. So that's the type you can use when you create a timeout. We're already grabbing the value. The first thing we ever want to do when we call this handle input, meaning we're calling this on every keystroke, we're going to clear the old timeout. Clear timeout timer.current. That's how the useRef works. It creates a property that's called current that's going to hold the value, the mutable value that you create in a useRef. And now you can see that it actually complains. I think it is because I initialized it as null. So I don't think we need to do that. No. When we specify the type here, we don't need to set it to null. Okay, so clear the timeout. Then, just as before, we set the text. And then we set the new timer, timer.current equal set timeout. And we have an inline function for this one. And then we're going to set the query and give it the value. And we're going to specify the time here to 300, meaning 0.3 seconds. If you want, you can be even more clean here and create a const time 300. And we can mark it as milliseconds. And then we can use time here instead. And then you can just change this value and it will change down here also. So that's more clean to do it like that. All right, so meaning that when we press a key, it's going to change the text. The text input is a controlled field, so it changed the state for the field. It gets the new value. But we wait 300 milliseconds before we actually hit the API by setting the query. So this means that the user have a little bit of time to type in the search phrase before we hit the API. So you can see we have the console log here in the index.tsx. And we reload the page. And we type in Star Wars. And you can see that it grabs stuff here again. First it's undefined. The data is undefined. But then it has the data here. And you can see that now we only have Star Wars stuff here because I typed that one in. And we can do it like this. And then you can see that we have the delay here. It's a little bit of delay, actually 300 milliseconds as we specified. So the user have a little bit of time to type the phrase in before we hit the API. And there are ways now in React 18. You have the use transition hook and the start transition, where you can set different updates to be urgent or non-urgent. And you can wait for the user to type something in before it does something. But that's actually not good when you fetch data from an API, because you're going to hit the API too many times because the computers today are so fast. It's better to have a debounce like this. Otherwise, you will make a lot of calls to the API. That's unnecessary. So I tried this out and I tried to make it work with the use transition, but it's not good. So I think the old-fashioned way to create a debounce like this is the way to go here when fetching data from the API. So I'm not using the new React 18 stuff with use transition and stuff like that. If you wonder, that's why. We don't want to call the API too many times if we don't need to. All right, we have a search input. I'm going to change that logo for the next video. Don't worry about that. And this is it for this part. Okay, we have the new correct logo here now. I swapped that one out. So you're going to have that in your folder when you start this course. Yeah, it looks much better now, I think, than the other one. You couldn't even see what it was. This is the new movie database API. So we're going to use that one. And now we're going to create this nice hero image here with the text and also the image. So we're actually going to see some stuff here now instead of just having the data here in the console. So what we're going to do now is to go back to our code, and we have this hero that we scaffolded out. So we're going to add some stuff to this one here. So up here, first we're going to import image, and we're also going to import something that's called static image data from next/image. And this is the type for the image that we're going to use, because the hero component is going to receive some props. So we need the type for the image URL. Type props. We have the IMG URL, and then we use this type, static image data. Then we have the title, it's going to be a string, and we have the text, and it's going to be a string. So these are the three props that we're going to have for this one. So we destructure them out, IMG URL, the title, and the text. And I set the types like that. And now we're going to add some divs here. This is going to be the wrapper div. So we have a class name. It's going to be relative. The width is going to be full. So w-full. And the height is going to be 128. And this one, we haven't actually created this one. It's not built in to Tailwind. So we're going to go to our... Yeah, going to close this node modules folder. And then we're going to go to the tailwind.config. And here inside of the theme, we have a property that's called extend. And this means that we can extend the already predefined classes in Tailwind. So we want to extend the height. You can see the really, really nice auto completion here. It already knows that property. That's sweet. And we're going to add in the 128. This is just a name that I call it. You can call it something else if you want to do that. And I'm going to set it to 40 rem, something like that. So we have created this new height of 128, and it's going to be 40 rem. And we're going to create some more stuff here later, but this is it for now. Now you can see that it complains here. So this is so nice with TypeScript. Now it knows that it needs some props, and it tells us, yeah, hey, you haven't sent in those props here to the hero. So we're going to do that later. But for now, we're going to first finish this hero component. So now we can use the height 128. You can see that it's 40 RM. So we created this one ourselves. So this is the wrapper div. I'm going to do it like this instead. And I'm going to create a new div, move hero inside of that one and do it like that. So that's the wrapper div around the hero. Then we're going to have the content inside of the hero, because this one will take up the full width as we specified here. So we create a new div with a class name of. This one is also going to be relative. We set it to flex, and flex dash col dash reverse. And that is because if we go back here and check out the application, I want the text to be at the bottom here of this hero. So that's why I set it to column reverse. Otherwise, it will be at the top here. So you can play around with this to see for yourself. I set the height to full. I set the max dash W dash 7XL, the same width, the same max width as we had before. I set the margin to auto. I set the set index to 10 so that it's placed over the other content. I set the padding bottom to 12. I want the text to be center. That's the default behavior. Yet again, if I go back here and I do it like this, you can see that the text is centered here. But on desktops, I want it to be left aligned. So initially it's centered, and then on the MD colon, I set it to text dash left. Then inside of this content div, we're going to have another div with a class name, and we're going to have the text as white, and max dash width is going to be 2XL on the text. I don't want it to be wider. I set the padding X to 4, like that. So this one here is the div that actually holds the text. I have an h2 tag with a class name, text-2XL. The MD, we change the text size when we're on desktop, text-5XL. We set the font to bold, so font-bold. And the padding bottom is going to be 8 pixels. So that is the h2 tag. And for that, we're going to have the title, like so. And then we have the text itself. And that's going to be p tag with a class name of text-LG. So we set the text to large. On larger screens, MD colon, the text is going to be XL. And for this one, we have the text. So that's the text, but we haven't really created the image. So we're going to do that now, just below here. Then we create our image, and you can prioritize images in Next.js to specify which images should be prioritized when preloading images. So I want to prioritize this one, so priority. Object fit is going to be cover on this one. And object position is going to be center. And the layout is going to be fill. And we have the source, the src, is going to be img URL. And we're also going to have an alt on this one. And we can call it hero-image. And we self-close it. So this should be it for this one. Save the component, go back to index. And we're going to add in some props here for the hero. First, we have the img URL. And we're going to grab this from the data that we fetched from the movie database API. So from data.pages, we're going to grab it from the first page. So we have the first element in this page array, 0. We have the results. Yet again, I'm going to grab the first result, so 0. And we have a question mark because this one may not exist, and otherwise TypeScript will complain. So by specifying a question mark here, it will be undefined if it can't find it. Otherwise, it will throw an error if it can't find a property. And we grab the background path. And now you can see that it complains. This is actually not the full backdrop path. We have the image base URL and the image and the backdrop size. We haven't imported them yet, but we're going to do that. That's in our setup. So if we go here or in our config, we have the image base URL and the backdrop size here. So we're going to import these ones inside of index. So I mark it as config. So import image base URL and backdrop size. And we're also going to need the poster size for later. So we import them here. And this means if we have a backdrop path, we create a turner operator, meaning that if we have this one, we're going to use the image base URL plus the backdrop size plus data.pages, the first element in the array, and the results 0, and the backdrop path. Otherwise, we're going to display the no image that we have in the public folder. So / no underscore image dot jpg as we have here in the public. And you can see that it complains now here on this prop. And that is because this is a string. It is not a static image data. So up here in the hero, we can specify that this can receive a string also, or we can remove the static image data instead. So I don't think, we don't actually need this one then. So we can specify it as a string. So let's try that out. Remove that type that I imported. And it seems to be working, but we need 2 more props. We need the title. And the title, we grab that from data.pages. The first dot results 0 dot title. And now this one complains. String undefined is not assignable to string. And we're going to fix that in a little while. But first, we're going to send in the text from the data.pages 0 dot results 0 dot overview. That's the property for the text. And you can see that it complains here now. It added in a question mark here because it can be undefined. First, we don't want this hero to be displayed when we're in a search. So I'm going to create some logic here. If we not have a query and we have some data and we have some pages, then we're going to display this one. So we move it up inside of that one. And otherwise, we're going to display nothing. So null. And this will make sure that we don't get these errors, and we don't need to have this one here either. So if we're not in a query, if the user didn't type something in, we're going to display the hero, because then we know that we're not in a search. And if we have some data, and if we have some data.pages, then we're going to display this hero component. So it can't really display anything if it's undefined now. So go back to our application, and you can see that we have this nice little header here. And it seems to be working great. And if we're in a search, you can see that it's removed. So that is also working. I actually thought that this one here could be undefined also, so that we needed a question mark, but I don't think that's needed. If you get an error on this, you can add in a question mark, but actually we're checking for pages, and then we should have a result. So I think we will be fine. And also, of course, this one here, I have this one in 3 different places, and actually we can remove it here. So we actually have it in 4 different places. So we could create this one outside of this, so we don't have to type it in every time. But I think in this small application, it's fine to do it like this. But if you want to make it more clean, you can put this one in a variable and use that one there instead. All right, that's the hero image. In the next part, we're going to create the grid for the movies. All right, let's continue on. We're going to create the grid for the movies, and we're also going to reuse this grid later for the actors on the individual movie page. So let's get started. Back to the code and inside of the grid component. The grid is going to have some props. Type props equal. We're going to have the title as a string. The children. It's going to be a React React node. And this is what I talked about earlier. Now we have to explicitly specify the children. You don't need to do that if you use the React.fc type that's built into React. We have a class name. We're going to pass on the class name so that you can style it outside of this component. We have the title, we have the children, and we have the class name from the props. And this one can still make an implicit return. And we have a div with a class name. So this is the wrapper div to the grid. And here we're going to pass on the class name prop so that you can style this outside of the component itself when you use it. Then we're going to have a title, h2, class name. Text is going to be XL, so text-XL. We're going to set the font to bold, font-bold. And the padding bottom is going to be 4. And then we have the title inside of here. Right? Then we have a div that's going to be the actual grid below the title with a class name of grid. And then we're going to go back to the Tailwind config again. So tailwind.config. We're going to create our own class here to be able to have a grid as we want it. So up here in theme, we have grid template columns. And you can see yet again that this one is auto-completed here. We have the IntelliSense from that great plugin that I installed earlier. So it knows all the properties that we can use. And inside here, we're going to create a property called auto-fill. That's the one I want to use. And inside here, we type in our CSS. Repeat auto-fill. And we set the min-max to 200 pixels and 1 fragment, 1 FR, and double parenthesis, something like that. And this one is just CSS. It's when you create a grid in CSS, you can specify the different columns. And I want to set it to repeat, and it's going to autofill. And min-max will specify that the element can't be less than 200 pixels, and we want it to always fill to 1 fragment. So it's going to change width, but it can never be less than 200 pixels. If it's less than 200 pixels, it will remove a column and create one less column instead to make the element wider. Right, so back to the grid.tsx. So here we specify the grid, and then we use the newly created property, grid-calls-auto-fill. And we set the gap to 8 on the grid. And inside we have the children. And this is it for this component. We have created kind of a wrapper component for the grid. So we have a title for that one. And so this one here is the grid, so to say. This div is the grid. And every children that we pass into this component will be inside of the grid. All right, so we go back to index. Now it complains because we're not giving it the props as it needs. So I wonder if we actually, we put a question mark on the class name. So we don't need to specify the class name if we don't want to do that. So go back to the index. But in this case, we want a class name. So we can specify more Tailwind classes here. We set the padding to 4. The max.w7xl is going to be the max width, the same again as we used before. And we set the margin to auto, just as before. And it's not going to auto close because we're going to wrap some stuff inside of here. Everything that goes inside of this one will be in the grid. But we also want a title on this one. If we have a query, if the user types something in, we know that the user is searching for something. So we can check if we have a query. Then we do a turner operator. Then the title is going to be search results. We can also specify the count of the search results. So if we create backticks here instead, you can see up here I used plus to concatenate the string. I can use backticks instead and create the string. But I like to do it in different ways when I teach stuff to show that you can do it in many different ways. But here I use backticks, and then we have the search results, and we have the result. First we have a colon, and then I have a $ and curly brackets, and then we grab from the data dot pages 0 dot, and you can see that we have the total results. And now it complains because this one can be undefined, so we add a question mark. And then here, if we're not in the search, we're going to display a text that's popular movies, like so. And it still complains, and that is because the children prop is missing, so we haven't actually created something inside of here. So we're going to map through our data, and we have curly brackets. We check for the data. It has to have some data, and the data.pages. Then we have a turner operator, and now we're going to make a nested loop here, because we have first have the pages and then we have the results. You could also create some function up here that actually merge this data together before you loop through it here. So it's up to you how you want to do it. This is an intermediate or advanced course, so I'm not going to show you everything in this one. But in my case, I'm going to do a nested loop. So first we're going to loop through the pages. Data.pages.map. And then we have a page. And from the page, we're going to map through the results, like so. And then we have a movie in the results. And for now, we can display a div with, I'm going to move it aside here. From the movie dot, we can have the original title maybe. And if we don't have any data, we're going to display null. And now it complains here. Missing key. We need to specify a key when we map through data in React. So we have a key, and the key is going to be from the movie.id. That one is unique, hopefully. All right, and this one doesn't complain anymore, and we have the data here. We map through the pages and we map through the results, and for now we're only displaying the movie original title. Save it, go back to our application, and you can see that we have the title here, and hopefully the grid will change. Yeah, you can see that it changed nicely here. So we have a fully responsive grid in just one line of code that we specified here in the config for Tailwind. So that's super great. One line and it's fully responsive. All right, so that's the grid. In the next section, we're going to create the movie card. So we will soon have a fully working homepage. So we're going to create the card, the movie card. We're actually going to create two components in this part. We need the thumb, also the thumbnail for the movie, and we need the card itself. So first we're going to create the thumb, and it's a wrapper around a NextJS image, so we don't need to specify all that stuff every time. So we create a thumb component for that. I call it a thumb. I don't know if it's a thumbnail actually, but yeah, I think it is probably. So you can call it something else if you want to do that. I think it's a thumbnail at least. So a new folder inside components, thumb, down here, a new file called thumb.tsx inside of that folder. And we import image from next/image. We're going to have a prop for this one, type props, and it's going to be the image URL, img URL, and it's going to be the type string. Right, then we create the component, const thumb. We destructure out the img URL. We have the props type. And it's an arrow function that's going to make an implicit return. We use the image component. And we want a placeholder for this one. If we go back to and reload this finished application here, you can see when I scroll here that it blurs. I hope you can see it here. So we want this one to show some blurred image when it fetches the image, so to say. So that's what we're going to create here. Next.js has some built-in stuff for this. We have a placeholder prop that we specify as blur. We have the blur data URL. And inside the public folder, I have an image that's called, no, I actually don't have it, but I'm going to put that there inside also for us. You don't have to do this. I'm going to fix it so I have it inside of there. And there you go. And I magically made it appear here. So I'm kind of a wizard here or something. No, not really. I moved it to this folder, and you're going to have it inside of your starter files when you copy over the files as you do in the beginning, so you don't have to do anything here. It should be there in the folder. So we're going to grab this placeholder image, /placeholder.jpg. That's the placeholder image. We're going to set a class name on this one. We want it to be rounded, large, LG, so rounded dash LG. The layout is going to be fill for this one. The object fit is going to be cover. And we have the src, and that is going to be the img URL that we send into this one as a prop. And we have alt, it's going to be thumb. And then we're going to self-close this image. And let's also export this one, export default thumb. And this should be it for the thumb component. And we're going to use this one inside of the card component that we're going to create now. So go inside of the card folder. We have scaffold out the component here. I'm going to mark this with components and import thumb from /thumb. Then we have some props for this one. Type props equal. We have the img URL. It's going to be of the type string. We have the title as a string. And we also have the subtitle. It's not showing on the home page, but it's showing when we show the actors on the individual movie page. So we're going to insert this one here also now, but we're not going to use it right now. This one is going to be optional. So we have a question mark, and it's a string. Then we have the card with the structure of the props, img URL, title, and subtitle. And we specify the props like that. Yet again, we're going to make an implicit return. So I wrap this one in parentheses. And on the wrapper div, we have a class name of. On this one, we're just going to set the height here. So age 80, that's the height. Then we have another div here. Do it like this instead. Remove the card text. And then we have a class name of relative. And the height is going to be full on this inner div. Then we have the thumb. That's the component that we just created. We pass along the image URL like so. That's the only prop for the thumb. Then we have the div with the text. Class name is going to be absolute. We have the width, it's going to be full. We have the bottom -0. So we place it directly at the bottom. We have the padding X 4 and the padding Y 2. We have the rounded -B-XL. So the bottom of this one is going to be rounded, and I'm going to explain it for you. This is the one that we create now, the little black or gray badge down here with the text inside of it. So it's just going to be rounded on the bottom, not here on the top. So that's why that one is rounded. So rounded -B-XL. And the background is going to be sync 800. So that's the div, the little badge that's going to have the text. So we have the h2 tag with the class name of text is going to be cyan. And these text colors and background colors are all built in Tailwind. So I'm using them for this one. I'm going to center the text with text-center. And the text size is going to be text-sm. And I also want to truncate the text if it gets too long. So you have a handy little class for that in Tailwind. Just type in truncate. And then inside of here, we're going to have the title. So this is enough for the home page, but I'm going to add in that little subtitle when we have the actors on the individual movie page. So we check if we have a subtitle with a Turner operator. If we have, we're going to add in a p tag with a class name of text-cyan 400 for that one. We're going to center the text again, text-center. And the text is going to be extra small, so text-XS. And we're also going to truncate this one. And we have the subtitle inside of there. And if we don't have a subtitle, we're not displaying anything. So we have a colon and null, because this is a turner operator where we do that stuff. This is the card component. So go back to the index component. We're already importing the card. So move that inside of here instead. So instead of showing the movie original title, we're going to place the card, and we need to give the card some props. The img URL is going to be, so we're going to check if we have a movie.posterPath. If we have that, we're going to grab the image base URL plus poster size. And here you can see that I concatenate the string with plus instead, but you could use backticks. Actually, I can do it with backticks here. Let's do that. So I have double backticks like that. And inside of there, I'm going to grab the image base URL. And then we have the poster size like that. Then we have the movie.posterPath. Otherwise, we're going to show the no image from the public folder. So /no_image.jpg. All right, then we need one more prop for this one, and we need the title. And we're going to grab that from movie.originalTitle. And this should be it. And you can see here why I used the plus instead, because we don't really have any other text here. So it's not very convenient doing it this way. I'm actually going to change this back. So it's good when you have some text and going to concatenate in some variable or something with backticks, but it doesn't really make sense here when we just have variables to merge together to a string. Save it, go back to our site. And you can see that it's working. We have that image, the blur image. So it's starting to look like something now, and I'm happy with that. So in the next part, we're going to create a loading spinner, and then we're going to fix the infinite scroll for this one. So we can try this out. So we can search for something, Indiana Jones. And it seems to be working great. We have this little spinner text. That's what we're going to do in the next part. We're going to create a spinner so that we can have an infinite loading of these movies, because we can only show one page right now, and that's no good. Okay, so let's create the spinner that we're going to show when we fetch more data. So go back to the code. We have scaffold out the spinner here. And this one is a little special because I want an SVG to be animated in this one. And I provided you with an SVG here inside of the public folder. So we're actually going to grab this SVG code and copy it. And we're going to paste it inside of the spinner component. So mark this one here, everything of this, and copy it. Go back to the spinner.tsx, and we're going to use that code inside of here. Instead of this div here, we're going to paste it in, something like that. And then I'm going to add in some Tailwind classes here. I'm going to wrap this one in a div class name. We're going to have it as a flex. I'm going to center the items with items-center and justify -center, and the margin is going to be 4, so m-4, and we can move this SVG up inside of that div. And the last thing I'm going to do here is to add in some class names on the SVG itself, because I want it to spin and animate around in a circle. So class name, I set the width to 12 and I set the height to 12. And then animate-spin. And this is super nice in Tailwind. It's built in when you want to animate stuff. So we just add on that class animate-spin, and it will spin around. Do some auto formatting, save the file, go back to the index file, and down where we type in spinner. No, we already have the spinner. All right, so let's go back to our site. And you can see that we have the spinner down here, so that's great. And this is everything we need to do with this spinner. So we're going to fetch some more pages in the next part and use this spinner. We're only going to display this spinner when we actually fetch more data. Okay, let's make sure that we can fetch more movies when we scroll to the bottom. So go back to the code, and there's many ways to implement this infinity scroll. I want to do things as simple as possible. So I know that a lot of people use, for example, resize observer, but I'm going to use a fairly simple way of doing this, and it has worked great for me also in real client projects. So this should be fine here for us also. We're going to create a function in the index.tsx that's called handle scroll. And this one is going to take in the event from the scroll. It's going to be a react.ui event, and it's a generic, so you can specify it even more. It's an HTML element, like so. And then we create the function body. So I'm going to destructure out the scroll top, the client height, and the scroll height from the event.currentTarget. So these ones are properties that you get from the event. And I'm going to use these ones to calculate when we're at the bottom of the div when the user scrolls. And it's fairly simple, to be honest. If scroll height minus scroll top equals client height, then we know that we're at the bottom, and then we fetch the next page. And this fetch next page is from React query. So it's a function that we destructured out here that we call to fetch the next page. And this is everything you need, actually. We can remove this console log also. We don't need that anymore. And we're going to attach this scroll event on the main div here. So on scroll equal, and we call the handle scroll function that we just created. And here down where we have the spinner, we don't want to show the spinner when we're not fetching anything. So inside curly brackets, we check if it's loading or is fetching. Then we show the spinner. Otherwise, it's null. And the difference, shouldn't be like this, is fetching. And the difference between is loading and is fetching is loading is when you load the data the first time, or if you revalidate the query or anything like that. Is fetching is when you're fetching stuff in the background, or if you fetch a new page and stuff, then this one is going to be true. But is loading is not going to be true. It's only true the first time, or if you revalidate the complete query or anything like that. So we're going to use is fetching to show the spinner when we fetch a new page. So save it. Go back to your application and see if it works. And you can see that we fetch more stuff here now. And it's so fast so you can't actually see the loading spinner almost. But these images aren't fast here. It takes a lot of time to fetch the images. It isn't usually this slow. I don't know why it is like that now. Probably a temporary thing. Isn't there one that hasn't any image also? Would be great. Yeah, there it is. So that one is also working, and that's great. You can see it's a little bit faster here now, so that's also great. This is also the reason why I only fetch this client-wise and don't do it on the server in Next.js, because when we load more pages and we, for example, click on a movie and go back here to this homepage, Next.js is going to server-side fetch this again and only fetch the first page. So it will wipe out everything from React query. So the cache is wiped out, and we can't utilize this great caching functionality that's in React query. So I would say it's a give and take. You can build functionality around this, of course, and make it server-side fetched, but I don't think it's very useful here, to be honest. It's actually really fast anyway, so we don't need to do that. So this one is all fetched client-wise, but the movie themselves, when we click on the movie, is going to be fetched server-side, and we're not going to use React query for that one. So that's what we're going to do next. We've actually finished the homepage now, and we're going to move on and create the individual movie page. All right, we've finished the homepage. And we're going to continue on to create the individual movie page. That means when we click on a movie, we're going to see some information about that movie and also route the user to another page. So that's what we're going to do next. And we're going to start off by scaffolding out some stuff. But first, we want to make sure that the user is able to click on the different movies. We haven't created a link for that yet. So here in the index.tsx, make sure to go to the top. And we're going to import link from next/link. So we're going to create a link here, and you can see that I have this wrapper div here, and this is because I want to do some styling. For example, showing the hand cursor when you hover over a card. You could also, as I did before, create a class name and pass it along to the card and do the styling there. But in this case, I have created a wrapper div instead. So we're going to have the link up here. The key is going to be on the link now instead, so movie.id. And in this case, we're going to create a dynamic link. So I have backticks, and we have $, curly brackets, movie.id. Because every movie is going to have its own URL, and that URL is going to be the movie ID. Move this one inside of the link, and we can remove the key here on the div, but we're going to create some styles. So class name equal. We set the cursor dash pointer. That will set the cursor to the pointer, obviously. Then on hover, and the way you do it in Tailwind is when you're going to style a different state, you have the name of the state, in this case hover, and then you have a colon, and then you can style it. And we're going to set the opacity to 80, I think. And then we set the duration to 300, and it will make a nice little transition for this one. Save it, go back to the application, and let's see what happens. So when we hover, you can see that it gets a little opacity change, and the duration of 300 will make it smooth. And we have the hand cursor, and when we click here, you can see that we routed to this link here, but we haven't created this page yet. We're going to do that next, and we're going to start off by scaffolding out some stuff for this page. And this is going to be a dynamic route because we have different IDs for each movie. So if we click a movie here, for example, we have a different ID, and we need to deal with that somehow. So go back to the code. And dynamic routes in Next.js are created by creating a new page inside of the pages folder, so a new file. And then we have those square brackets, and inside of the square brackets, you give the param a name. And in our case, we can call it ID. And this is the name of the param that we can grab in that page, .tsx. So this is how you create a dynamic route. And it will make sure that we can grab this movie ID from the param ID. And I'm going to show you that, of course, when we create this page now. So inside here, we're going to scaffold out some stuff. We need a lot of things from the config file. So first import movie URL, credits URL, image underscore base underscore URL. And we need a backdrop underscore size. And we need a poster underscore size. From ../config. So a lot of stuff there. And if we check out the config file, you can see that the image base URL, backdrop size, and poster size, these are the ones that we used before. We have a couple of new things here, and that is the movie URL and the credits URL. And these are actually functions that I created where we can send in the ID and create the URL from that ID. The ID is kind of merged inside in the middle of this URL for this API. So by calling one of these functions and sending the ID, we will get the correct URL for that specific ID. All right, so go back to the id.tsx file. Basic fetch, we need that one also. Import basic fetch, and that is the exact same that we created before. We're going to need some types. Import getStaticPaths and getStaticProps. And also the next page, like that. from Next. So these are built-in types in Next that we're going to use, because now we're not using React query. We're going to server fetch the data and also create static pages. So that's what we need those types for. And we can actually be more specific here. So import type. Then we have some types from our API. And those types are the ones that we created earlier. Import type, movie, credits, crew, and cast from ../API/types. And we haven't really created these ones here, because we only created the types for the home page. So we're going to do that now. So go inside of the API folder, the one that's in the root that we created, and types.ts. So we have the movie type and the movies, but we don't have the types for the cast, crew, and credits. So we're going to create those ones. Export type, cast. I'm creating types now with only the properties that we need. So you can add in properties in these types if you want to use more stuff from the API. We have the character as a string. We have the credit underscore ID as a string. We have the name as a string. And we have the profile underscore path as a string. Right? That's the cast. Then we have the export type crew. And we have job as a string. We have name as a string. We have the credit underscore ID as a number. That one. And the last type that we're going to create, export type credits. We have the ID as a number. We have the cast. And the cast is the type that we created up here, and it's going to be an array. So cast and as an array. And we have the crew. And that's, of course, the one that we created here. And that's also an array like that. So that's our types that we need. Then we're also going to need to create a few new components for this page. So we can scaffold them out. So inside the components folder, we're going to create a new folder that's called Breadcrumb. And inside that one, we create a new file, breadcrumb.tsx. And we have the component const breadcrumb. And for now, we're just creating an empty component. So we can return a div that says breadcrumb. And we export default breadcrumb like that. And then we copy this one, save it, of course. And then we need to create another folder inside of components that's called MovieInfo, capital M, capital I. And a new file with the same name, movieinfo.tsx. We paste in the code that we copied from the breadcrumb, and we change breadcrumb to MovieInfo. I changed them all three here in a go. And that's actually the two new components that we need to create, because we're going to reuse the grid and the card for this one. So that's all the components. Go back to the id.tsx. And somewhere up here, we can mark it with components and import all the components that we need for this page. First, we need a header. Then we need the breadcrumb that we created now. We need the MovieInfo. And we need the grid. And we need the card. I think that's all of them. So for now, let's just create a page without props. We're going to have props for this one also, but I'm going to create those in the next part when we fetch the data server side. So const product, it's going to be of the type next page. We can make an implicit return because we're only returning JSX here on this page. And we're going to have a main tag. Then we have the header. And this one, I also talked about this one earlier. We have this underscore app.tsx where you can wrap stuff that you want to be visible on all the pages in your next JS application. So we could have the header here, but then we need to do some other stuff and have the state for the search field to not display it on the individual movie page. So I think that's a little bit more tricky to create, and I don't think it makes sense in this small application where we only have one extra route to the individual movie page. So that's why I use the header here again. But if you don't want to do that, you can do some tricks and have a state for the search field here, and you can turn the search field on and off by checking which route you're on, for example. But that's a lot more work than just use the header on both index and the individual movie page. And I think that's a big part of coding. Actually, you need to make decisions on what's best and to don't overcomplicate things. So that's why I do it like this. And you can see in this case, we're not going to send in that prop that sets the state of the text field. And that will make sure that we don't display the text field because we created that logic before where it's only going to display the search field when you actually send in the function to set the state for that one. All right. We have the MovieInfo. Then we're going to have the grid. And inside the grid, we have many cards. In this case, you can see that it no complaints here, but that's fine for now. We're going to fix that later. That's because we're not sending in any props to it. Export default. And I don't know what's in my head now. I don't know why I called it product. Must be some stuff in my head from a client or something where I created a page. It's not a product. It's, of course, a movie. So we're going to call it movie, of course. Not product. Don't do that. Call it movie. And this is it for now. We have scaffolded out the stuff that we need for this page. And in the next part, we're going to continue on and actually fetch some data server side and create static pages in NextJS. All right, time to fetch some server-side data. But first, you can see here the page that we created. It looks like this now. It actually looks like crap. And we have a lot of errors here that we're going to fix also. But at least we have a page now. We don't have a 404 that is showing when we click on a movie. So it's working. We're just going to fix this page. And we're going to start off by fetching some data. And in Next.js, you have two ways of fetching server-side. And that is to server-side generate your page, or you can create static pages. And static pages are just old school pages when you created a static site where we didn't have all this cool stuff as Next.js and React and all that stuff. Long ago when I started off creating web pages, you created each page as a static page and you couldn't do much with them actually. So when you create static pages in Next.js, it essentially is what it sounds like. It's a static page. So for example, if we go inside here and we go to this movie here, and when we have a static page here for this movie, it's static. So if you don't update it, it's going to look the same 10 years from now. But you have ways of updating the page in Next.js also, so you can always keep it fresh. In our case, the data doesn't change that much. So it's very suitable to have a static page. And then we decide on when we're going to update the page. A static page is pre-created, so to say. A server side will get created every time you visit the page. And that's actually not very efficient in this case. It's better to have a static page for these ones and just update them maybe once every 24 hours or so. The way we're going to do it is the first time a user visits a movie, Next.js is going to create a static page for that one. And then the next time the same user revisits it, or it's another user, it's going to use that static version of the page. So we don't have to recreate it every time that you're going to do if you server-side render it, or if you have it client-side also, of course. So we're going to use something that's called getStaticProps. And just below here, I like to have it down below here in my pages. We're going to export a function, export const, that's called getStaticProps, like that. Very important that it's named exactly like that. This will make sure that we can create static pages. If you wanted to server-side render it, then you can type in get server-side props instead. So this is how Next.js can decide if it's a static page or if it's server-side rendered. But we want get static props. So I'm not going to talk about get server-side props. They work almost exactly the same here when you actually code it. It just behaves a little bit different. So get static props, we have the type that we imported before getStaticProps equal, and this function is going to be async, and it's also going to be called with the context that we're going to use to grab some data from. So you can see here, if we hover over this, TypeScript says that getStaticProps context, parsed URL query, and preview data. So we have a type for this one, as we type this one as a getStaticProps. And as we type this one here, we have the types for the context also, and the context is of the type getStaticProps context. We can't see it here now, but we can grab some stuff from the context. So now we're going to grab our ID from the context. That's this one that we created here inside of this square brackets. So if we named it something else, we can grab it with that name, but now we named it ID. So const ID, and from the context dot, you can see that we have a lot of stuff here on the context, but we need to grab this from the params. This property will hold the param here that we named when we created the page name .id, and I'm going to cast it as a string. Also, we need a question mark because it can be undefined, so otherwise we will have an error. Then we're going to have two endpoints here. We're going to fetch data for the movie, and then we're going to fetch data for the credits. So we're actually going to do two fetches here. So we create the first endpoint, movie endpoint. It's a string equal, and we have a function that we imported from the config that's called movie URL, and we give it the ID, and this will create this URL that I talked about before. Then we need the credits endpoint. It's a string, and we also have a function for that, credits URL, and we give it the ID. So if we go back to the config, it's these functions here that we give the ID, and it will create a correct string with the URL to the endpoint for us. Right, time to fetch some data then. We're going to grab the movie, const movie. We put it in a const called movie. We await it. We have our basic fetch, and we're going to give it the movie endpoint. We can also give it some types, as this is created as a generic. So we give it the movie type. Then you can see if you hover over movie that this one is of the type movie. And then we're going to fetch the credits, const credits equal await basic fetch. And we give it the type of credits, and also send in the credits endpoint like so. So hopefully we have all the data in those consts. But from the credits, we only need the directors. So we're going to filter them out. Get the directors only. Const directors. From the credits. Dot. You can see that we have all the types now because we typed it. We have the crew. And we're going to filter the crew. We have a member. Member.job should equal director with a capital D, and that's how we know that it's a director, and hopefully we have all the directors here. So now we have all the data that we need for this page, and then we can return something here inside getStaticProps. So we return an object. We have the props. We have the movie. As this is ES6, we don't need to type it in like this. It's enough to just type movie. The same goes with the directors. Then we have the cast, and the cast is going to be from the credits.cast. So we actually needed the cast here also, and not only the directors, as I said, from the credits. This cast is also from the credits. All right. So this is fine. This is going to send in the props to this page that we can grab here. So we type our props. We have the movie. It's going to be of the type movie. We have the directors. It's going to be of the type crew. An array of crew. Cast is going to be of the type cast. So the directors is a crew, so to say. So that's why it has that type. So how do we deal with those props in a page? Well, the next page is also generic, so we can send in the props like this, and then we destructure them out as usual. Movie, cast, and directors. And this is how we can access those props. So now we fetch this data server side and we send it into these props to this page. So by passing in them here in the return statement of getStaticProps, we make sure that the page has access to this data and these props, because this is all fetched before the page renders on the server. All right, that's fine and all, but then we need also to kind of recreate this static page. Otherwise, it will always stay like this. So here in the return statement, we have a comma, and we create a new prop. You can see that it's already here. Typescript tells us that. Revalidate. We have 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours. And this will rebuild page every 24 hours. So it's only active for 24 hours. Then we recreate the page. We can actually see the data now. We're going to create all these components and we use that data. But we want to do one more thing, and that is to tell Next.js to create a static page when the page is first visited. And we can do that by export const getStaticPaths. So here you can specify which pages you want to be created as static pages. And it's an async function, just as getStaticProps. And in this, we're only going to return an object where we set the paths to an empty array, because we want all of the paths to have this behavior. And we can set a fallback. In this case, we're not setting a fallback, we're setting it to blocking. So this is going to make sure that every time, the first time a page is visited, it's going to create a static page for that one. And the next time a user goes to the same page, it's going to use that static page instead. And this is what makes that work. And this is it for this part. We have hopefully grabbed all the data that we need, and we can continue on. And we're going to start by creating the breadcrumb in the next part. We actually should have that one here also. We can add it in just below the header. Breadcrumb. I forgot about that one. So that's the one that's going to go there. So in the next part, we're going to create the breadcrumb. We're going to create the breadcrumb up here first. So we go from top to bottom as we did before. So go back to the code editor and the breadcrumb component. It's in the components and breadcrumb. We already scaffolded this one out. And for this one, we're going to need a link. Import link from next/link. And it's also going to have a prop, type props. We have the title as a string. And we destructure out the title and we assign the type props like that. We can make an implicit return. And the wrapper div is going to have a class name. And we set the background to sync 800. And then we're going to have a div. Let's see here. Do some auto formatting like that. Looks a little bit better. So just as before, we have the background here. That's the color here that goes all the way from left to right. And then we have an inner div that's going to be centered with that max width as we set. So this is the inner div with the class name of flex. Flex is really good to use to center stuff and position stuff. In this case, we're going to items-center them. We set the max-w7xl just as before. We have the m auto, and that will center that div. We set the padding to 4 on all directions. And the text is going to be white. And the text is also going to be large. So text-lg. Then we remove this here. And inside of that inner div, we're going to have the link. Because we want this one to link back to the home page. we have an href equal /, and that will link it back to the home page. And inside of that link, we have a span with a class name. On hover, so hover colon, we set the opacity to 80. We want the cursor to be a pointer, cursor dash pointer, and the duration dash 300. And the span is just going to say home. Then we have another span with a class name of block. We set the padding X to 2. And then we're going to have this pipe like that. You can have whatever you want, of course, but that is the divider I like to have here. And the last span with the class name. Actually, those ones are not going to go inside of the link. So we're going to move them out. The class name, we set the font to bold. And we're going to truncate the text. And inside of that one, we have the title. So that's all for this component. Go back to the page, the id.tsx. And now you can see that it complains because it wants the title. And now we're going to see if our data fetching is working. So we give it the title from movie.original title. So let's see if this works. Save it. Go back to our application. You can see that we have the nice little breadcrumb up here. And it changed the title just as it should. And we can link back to the home page. So that's nice. We have a little horizontal movement here, and that is because the scroll bar disappears here. But it works, so that's sweet. In the next part, we're going to continue on and create this MovieInfo, this little section here. So we're going to create this section here, what I call the MovieInfo, and it's going to be a lot of code in this component. So it's by far the largest component in this application. And it's probably also going to be a long part. We better get started right away. Go back to the code. And inside of the MovieInfo, we're going to start by importing some stuff here. Import image. We're going to need that one to display the image from next/image. Then we're going to need some helpers. So we have something that's called calc time and convert money from the helpers that I provided to you. And if we look in that file, we have these small little functions here that will convert the money to the correct currency and stuff, and also give us the correct time in hours and minutes. So these are the ones that we import in the MovieInfo, and we're going to use them later. We have some components. We're going to import the thumb and use that here also. And then we're actually going to create a new component that's called a pill. So we can do that now. And that is the little one that I have here. So inside the components, create a new folder called pill. And inside that folder, create the pill.tsx. So we have some props for this one. Type props equal text : string. Class name. And this one is just as before going to be optional if we want to set our own classes on it. Const pill equal, and then we destructor out the class name and the text. We're going to have the props. And we make an implicit return. I don't know why it complains. That's because I haven't exported it. Export default pill like that. And then we have a div with a class name. And here is a lot of stuff. We set the background to cyan 800. We set the text to white. We set the text size to SM. The font to bold, font-bold. The padding X is going to be 2. The padding Y is going to be 1. The margin is going to be 2. We want it to be rounded, -full. Oh, it's so long here. And we want it to be an inline dash block. And this is actually going to be inside of backticks instead. Like that. And then, of course, that's JavaScript. So we need to have the curly brackets there and there. And this is because I want to merge in the class name also here. If we have some extra classes, so $sign and the class name like that. Oh, it's very hard to see here. I don't like this at all, to be honest. But we have the text here. You can't really format it in a good way. Maybe a little bit better, but those class names is really long now. So hope you followed me here. I have this as a template literal, so we can merge in more class names if we want to do that on this one. All right. Go back to the MovieInfo and we import pill, and there you have it. Then we need some types. Import crew like that from the API and types. And let's see here how I'm going to structure this, because we have a lot of props with this one. I think it's 10 of them. And you could also create an object and send in as just one prop. But I think it's more specific to actually have the props separated, because if you send in a complete object, you can send in more stuff in that object that you don't need, and that's no good. So that's why I like to specify them separately like this. Probably if there's more of them than we're going to have now, I'm going to create an object also, because it's starting to look a little bit ugly, to be honest. But we can type our props. So we have the thumb URL. It's going to be a string. We have the background IMG URL. It's also going to be a string. We have the title. It's going to be a string. We have the year. It's going to be a string. The summary is going to be a string. The rating is going to be a number. Directors or directors. Yeah, directors. There can be multiples. And there we use the crew type that we imported. We have the time as a number. We have the budget as a number. And we have the revenue as a number. So these are the props. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. So it may be better to have an object with those. But yeah, I think we will be fine in this application by having them separated. There are pros and cons in both ways. So the pros here are that we can separate them out, and it's not as easy to do something wrong. So that's why. All right, then we destructure them out here. Thumb URL, background, IMG URL, title, year, summary, rating, directors, time, budget, and revenue. And we assign the type of props. Do some auto formatting, and that looks a little bit better at least. And for this one, we're going to make an implicit return, and we have a wrapper div with a class name of relative, because we want to position something absolute inside of this wrapper. So that's why we set it to relative. We set the width to full. The height is going to be auto, and the padding is going to be 4. And then we have that center div again, as we always have. So for now, I'm going to move that MovieInfo inside, do some auto formatting again, and we have a class name. That one is also going to be relative. The height is going to be full, and the min height is going to be set to 128. We actually don't have that one specified in Tailwind, so we go back to our Tailwind config. So you can see we don't have a min height set here. So just below the font family, we set the min height 128. We could extend it also, but we're only using this property of min height, so we don't need to do that here. We set it to 40 rem. Right, go back to the MovieInfo, and that will make sure that we can use that one. So continue on. We set it to flex and flex col to the direction to be columns. Then we have a breakpoint, md colon flex row. So we change the direction on the flex depending on that one. We set the max w dash 7xl, and we set the padding to 4. I'm gonna move it to the side. There's so many classes here. We set the margin to auto, the set index to 10, and we set rounded XL. We set the background to sync 800 and the background opacity to 90. Whoa, that was a lot. But that is because if we go here, you can see it's the black box here that we created now with the rounded corners, and it's the center, and it's centered also when we move it like this. So this is the styles for that one that we created. We can actually be on that page, and let's see what happens. And save this one, and you can see that we have that little nice box here. And now it looks gray. That's because it's white background. We're going to attach the background image later. But for now, we're going to create that little thumbnail. If we look here, this one here, we're going to reuse the thumb, and we're going to attach this rating also for the movie. Okay, so the wrapper div and the center div, and then we have a wrapper div for the thumb with a class name of relative with full height 96, and the MD breakpoint is going to be H auto, MD one more, the width is going to be 1/3. All right. And inside of that div, we're going to have our thumb. The IMD URL is going to be the thumb URL. We close it, and then we want that rating on top of that one. So we create a div for that one with a class name. It's going to be absolute positioned, absolute top 4, left 4, rounded, full. Background is going to be white. The width is going to be 10. The height is going to be 10. We set it to flex. Justify it, dash center. And also the items is going to be center. The text is going to be black. The text size is going to be SM. And the font is going to be bold. All right, and yet again, a lot of classes here. I think I'm not very keen of that, to be honest. But yeah, I like Tailwind also, but there are some stuff here that I don't like at all. But it's very convenient, and you can do stuff fast. So I guess that's better. And then inside of here, we have the rating. So I think we should save this and go back to our ID and send in the thumb URL first to this one. And we first check if we have a movie.posterPath. If we have that, we have the image base URL again, plus poster size, plus movie.posterPath. Otherwise, we're going to display that no image again, no underscore image.jpg. Something like that for the thumb URL. And then we also have the rating, movie.vote_average. and make it move down there. That's great. So let's see if this works. Yeah, and we have the thumb here. That one isn't so good. Why is it? They must have changed something here because I didn't need to round that number before. But we can leave it like that for now. Actually, it doesn't matter. We can have it. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so you can round it if you want. Otherwise, we can just leave it like this. So I'm going to leave it like this for now. All right, so that's the thumbnail. Just make sure that it works in a responsive way also, and it does. So that's great. Then we're going to continue on in the movie info. So just below this wrapper div here, we're going to have another wrapper div. And this is going to be for the text and all that stuff with a class name of text white. The px is going to be 0, the padding x, and the padding y is going to be 4. md colon py, we change the py to 0. Then we text center, md text dash left. I could also have structured these ones a little bit different to make it more clear, because now they feels a little bit random. I have to admit that. Text left, md colon px dash 8. Width is going to be full. md width dash 2/3. So that's the wrapper div for the text and everything to the right of the thumbnail. Then we have an h2 with a class name of text-2xl, md text 4xl. So I changed the font size depending on the screen size. Font dash bold and pb padding bottom 4. And there we're going to have the title. And I also want to have the year in parentheses. So parentheses, curly brackets, year, like that. So we can send in the year, go back to the ID. Year equal movie dot release date dot split. And I do this split because I want to remove it, because there's other stuff here also. I just want the year and not all the other stuff. So that's why I split it by this dash here. And I grab the first item in the array. And we can actually give this one all the other stuff here also. So we have it. Background img URL. Yet again, we're going to check for the movie.backdrop path. If that one exists, we have the image base URL plus backdrop size plus movie.backdrop path. Otherwise, we're going to display that no image again. No underscore image.jpg. Okay. We need some more here. We have the title, movie.original title, the summary, movie.overview, directors. They are from the directors. Time, movie.runtime, budget, movie.budget, revenue, movie.revenue. And that should be all 10 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That will make sure that we have all the data for the movie info. And it also doesn't complain here now. So that's great. Okay, go back to movie info. Or we can actually check it out. We have some error here. It's undefined. It says, okay, did I do something wrong there? Yeah, I misspelled this one. Release date. And that's because I have misspelled this one in the type. So go back to the types for the movie. Yeah, you can see that I created this type and it's misspelled, and then it doesn't work because it needs to be named exactly the same as from the API. So change this one. It should say release. Save everything, go back, and now it works. And we have the title and the year here also, so that's great. So go back to MovieInfo. Below that, age 2, we're going to have an age 3 tag with a class name of text-lg font-bold, and it says summary. So that's the header for the summary. Then we have a P with a class name MB8 margin bottom 8 text-sm. The MD colon, we change the text to large text-lg, and here we show the summary. Save it, check it out. There we have it, and it's gonna change hopefully on smaller devices, and it does, so that's great. That's the summary. Then we're gonna have a wrapper div just like this, and we have another wrapper div for the different directors, and inside of that one we have an h3 with a class name of text lg and font bold, and we have the director, but there can be multiple directors. For dealing with that, we have curly brackets, and inside of the curly brackets, we check the directors.length. If that one is greater than 1, we're going to add in an S. Otherwise, yeah, it's just empty. Check it out. So now it's just one director for that one. Then we have another div for the directors themselves. We're going to map through them from the directors. Map. We have a director. And we're going to have a p tag, the key. Always have a key when you map through stuff with React. From the director, we have the credit ID for the key. And then we display the director.name. Something like that. Save it, check it out. And there you have it. It's the director. The responsive design is also working. So here, it's a lot of divs here. It's a lot of nested stuff. You have 2 of them here, 2 closing divs. And then we're going to add in another div here with a class name of mt8 margin top 8. And here we're going to have all this stuff here, all the pills and stuff that we created. So first we have an h3 tag with a class name of text-lg font-bold, and it's going to say movie data or something. Yeah, you can call it what you want. Then we have 3 pills. The first one going to have a class name ml-0, and here you can see that's why I created that one, because now I can add different classes here. It's only the first one that I want to change the margin left to 0, so I can do that on that one. The text is going to be inside curly brackets running time colon, then I have a $, curly brackets. We're going to calc time. That's the function that we imported from the helpers, and we give it the time. So let's check this out if it works. So we have the running time of 1 hour and 59 minutes. Then we're going to add in the other pills. So we have another pill with the text of curly brackets and backticks budget colon $, curly brackets, convert money. That's also the function from the helpers budget. Self-close it. And the last pill, gonna have a text of curly brackets, double backticks, and inside of those we have the revenue colon $, curly brackets, convert money. And here we give it the revenue instead. So we use the same function to calculate the revenue. Save it, go back to see if it works. And it works great. So I'm happy with that. So this is all the information inside of this one, but we don't have the background image yet. So we're going to add that one in also. So go down 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And before the last closing div tag, we're going to create an image. We're going to prioritize this by setting priority. Placeholder. I'm going to scroll up a bit. It's going to be blur. Blur data URL is going to be the same as before. Placeholder.jpg. So / placeholder.jpg. Object fit is going to be cover. Object position is going to be center. The layout is going to be fill. The src is going to be the background image URL. And the alt is going to be, what's this going to be? Thumb also, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't matter. And we self-close it. And hopefully we should have a fully working MovieInfo, I think. And it seems to be working great. We have the background image. Sweet, sweet, sweet. It works. There's not much left to do. We have the grid. I'm going to show the different actors and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to do in the next part. Okay, one more thing to go for the movie page here, and that is to show the actors for the movie. And actually, we have all the stuff that we need for that. We already created that card component, and we have the grid. So go inside of this id.tsx here, and we're going to change some stuff here. On the grid, we're first going to have a class name. That's going to be p4 padding 4 max.width.7xl. And M auto, and that will center the grid just as before. And then we have the title, and this time it's going to be actress, and now it doesn't complain. Then inside of the grid, we have the cast, so we're going to map through the cast, and we have an actor. We make an implicit return. We have a card. The key for the card is going to be from the actor.credit ID. We have the IMG URL, and yet again, we do this stuff where we check if the actor.profile path exists, and then we have the image-based URL plus the poster size plus actor.profile path. Otherwise, we have a / and no underscore image.jpg. Then we have the title, actor.name, and the subtitle. Now we're using the subtitle here. We didn't do that on the home page. So we're going to see if that works. Actor and character. Then we self-close this one. And this should be it, hopefully. Go back to our app. You can see that it works. We have the subtitle here and everything, and it's responsive, and that's great. So it works. That's how easy it was to create that grid, but we have some error here still. Or is it the old ones? Image is missing required source property. Okay. Which one is it? Image alt thumb. Yeah, okay, that's because I have this card here. That extra card. So we're going to remove that one and save it. Reload it, and now it works beautifully. And here from here, you can extend this application if you want and show the information from the different actors. I'm going to stop here for this course. So I'm only have this level where you go to the movie and you can actually click on the actors. But you can add that in. It should be fairly easy now, I think. It's the same procedure as when you create this page. So you have the ID for the actor and create a route. All right, that's the grid, and that's actually the complete application. But we're also going to talk a little about error handling and 404s. So that's what I'm going to do in the next part. If we check the index.tsx, you can see that we have a property from React query that's called error. So we can actually display something for the user if something goes wrong. So in the fetch function here, you can see that we throw if there is an error. So you need to throw an error for React query to actually grab the error and show it. So in the index.tsx, we can do something before we actually return something. We can check if error, then we return something else. So div, in this case, yeah, oh no, something went wrong. You can, of course, show another component here or do something else. The main part is that you can check for this error and you can do something if there is an error. So save it, and nothing should probably happen now because we don't have an error. So it just works. And you can see the beauty here also with React query. Now I have scrolled down and added some pages here. So if I go to this one here, and then I go back, you can see that the pages are all there, and that is the cache in React query. And that's what I talked about also. If we were going to server render this one, this cache would be useless for us because NextJS will server render the first page every time you go back and forth between the home page and another movie. So it wipes out the cache from React query. So I think it's better to have this cache here in React query and just leave it like this and don't fetch the data on server side for the home page. It's fairly fast now anyway, so it doesn't matter, I think. But I guess they're going to come up with some smart stuff probably for React query to work better with Next.js. But the problem is that, yeah, it's called the query client, and it's only available in the client, not on the server. So we can't really get the client on the server if we don't save it somehow and read it again on the server. So you got to do a lot of stuff to get it to work. So that's why I choose to grab it on the client with React query in this infinity scroll. Okay, so that was the error. Then if you want to handle something like, let's say that a user goes, we have a movie here, we go to that URL, but then you add in something else here. This page could not be found. Let's say that you want to handle this one and have your own 404 page. So go back to the code. You can create a page inside pages, call it 404.tsx. And then from now, we can just copy everything from the home page, go back to the 404, paste it in, rename it 404. No, it can't be named like that. Name it error. And then we remove all the stuff here. Make an implicit return instead. And we create a div. This route doesn't exist. Okay, yeah, it tells me that stuff, but yeah. We can remove some stuff here. We just need the next page. Save it. Don't exist. Yeah, all right. I don't know which is the correct one. And you can see that it shows that page instead. So you can create your own 404 page by just creating a page inside of pages that's called 404.tsx. And that will work instead. Just to make sure that everything else works, and it does. Yeah, so that's it. That's how you handle the 404s and also how you handle the error from React query. This is it. This is the complete application. So in the next part, I'm going to show you how to deploy it on Vercel. One more thing to do, and that is to deploy our application. Otherwise, no one will see it, and that's no good. So we're going to deploy it to Vercel. And Vercel, I think it's awesome, actually, and I'm not sponsored in any way. Vercel has also created Next.js, so it's probably the best platform to deploy a Next.js app. And what you need to do is to create an account here. It's free, so don't worry about that. this is a collection of all your projects. So I have 2 of them now, and we're going to create a new one. So I click on new project, and here you can import a Git repository. So it's important that you push your code to your Git repository, and you can see your username here and all the repositories you can access here. So if you can't see your project here, your Git repository, as it says here, click here, and you're going to add permissions from GitHub to let Vercel access that repository. So very important, if you don't see your repository, add those permissions on GitHub by clicking here. I can click here, you can see. So yeah, and it wants me to log in and stuff like that. And that will take you to the page where you can grant access for Vercel to which repositories you want it to be able to use. And in my case, I have access to the RMDB version 4. So I'm going to import that one. And then it takes us to this little screen here when you can configure your project. Movie application can be the name, like that. It's going to be root directory, and framework is NextJS. One important thing here is the environment variables, because if we look in our code, we have this env.local file here where we have the env variable. So we created an API key variable. I'm not going to show you that now because I have my own API key inside of there. So I'm not going to show you that one. But inside env.local, you should have your API key. So go back to Vercel, and we type in the exact name of our env variable, API_key. So you're going to paste in your key and click add, and then you click deploy. Yeah, and you can see here now that it complains because, it could only have 100 alphanumeric lowercase characters, so my project name can't be named like that. Movie application. I change it to that one, and I deploy it. Yeah, probably must have something like that. And now we just wait for it to deploy. Yeah, and there you have it. So it's published and deployed, and as soon as you change something in your code and push it to your GitHub repository, it will start build a site again here. So it's automatically deploying it again, and that's super sweet. So you have the continuous deployment here where it automatically will update itself. And if we go to dashboard, we have our site here, and you have some few links here actually, +2. So you have the domain here. You can, of course, attach your own domain to it. We just make sure that it works, and it seems to be working great. The one thing that I noticed with Vercel is that when we have a lot of images like this, it will complain because you have a limit on your free account. So it will complain pretty fast actually, because those images here are processed and it builds up pretty fast with images here. We have a lot of them just here on that page. So that's some things to think about when you use Vercel for free. You can have it for free and have all those images because it won't work. It will complain. I think the limit is 1,000 images or something, and that will build up pretty fast. All right, so that's it. That's the complete application. Hopefully you learned a lot here, and hopefully I'll see you in another course or tutorial on my YouTube channel or someplace else.